So what you'll find on coffee trees are, all the cherries ripen at the same rate. So you'll find cherries that are green, cherries that are very ripe. So selective picking is the art of coming through and picking only the ripest cherries. And then moving on, coming back to this plant, and as these continue to mature, picking them when they're ripe. Moving on, coming back to the plant, and they can have as many as 5 or 6 passes in harvest season.
Ellas cortan el café, digamos, más maduro, ¿verdad? Para un café gourmet. Claro que se les pasa, digamos, algunos que otros así de falto, ¿va? Pero en la escogida tienen que sacar el café para que vaya seleccionado.
Bueno. So after the coffee is picked, it's delivered to Sal and put into the receiving station. And then from there, the coffee is directed to the depulping, or the wet processing, which starts with depulping. And the seeds are squeezed out of the cherries. And then, depending on the type of processing method, if it's a washed coffee, it will go to a fermentation tank, and there it'll stay 14, 15, 16, up to 18 hours, depending on the weather. If it's a pulped natural, as soon as the seeds are squeezed out of the cherries, it'll be taken to the drying patio. Once the coffee is dried down to about 11 or 12% moisture content, it'll be taken to the dry processing, where it goes through hulling and then sorting. The sorting part of the process is really 3 steps, and the first step is the coffee is sorted by size. The second step, the coffee is sorted by density, and then the third step, the coffee is visually sorted, and that's done either by hand or with an optical sorter. If the coffee is a natural dry or a natural processed coffee, the actual cherries will be taken straight to either a drying screen or a drying patio. They'll be dried just like a coffee that's gone through wet processing, but then the coffee in the dried cherry will go to dry processing and hulling. So what we've got here are 3 varying degrees of ripeness, and the experiment we're doing is we're taking, all these coffees are obviously ripe, we're taking coffees that are ripe, more ripe, and extremely ripe, drying them, and then they're going to go through normal processing, and then we'll cup the coffees to determine what types of flavor differences we get out of these varying degrees of ripeness. So this will go to the,
still not the final.
This will go to the dry mill to remove the parchment.
Yeah.
Right. So this one goes through. It goes through 2 steps. It goes through wet processing, where the seeds squeezed out of the cherry, right? Yeah. And then it goes through. Obviously, it's dried, and then it goes to the dry mill. This, the natural.
The dry mill will turn into this.
The dry mill will turn into that. It removes the parchment. That's exactly right.
Nice.
So, wet processing, drying, right, and then dry mill. This doesn't go through wet processing. This coffee is brought to the drying table in cherry, so it's dried and then taken to the dry mill. So there's one less step. There's no wet processing. The seeds are never squeezed out of the cherries on this. They're dried in the cherry. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that in theory, it should be sweeter, more fruit.
It's a totally different flavor profile. Yeah. Washed, pulp natural and natural, they're three completely different flavor profiles. Same coffee, same farm, same varietal, same altitudes.
You know, these, I've never experienced anything like this. So, you know, I get educated through Mike and watching his videos and pictures from coming to these farms. But coming out here experiencing this firsthand has exceeded my expectations times 100. Jose Antonio goes to huge lengths to do the right thing. It's 100 years in his family that he's put a passion into these farms, and you can see it with their selective picking. This place we're standing on right now was wiped out from a volcano 4 years ago. It's just amazing. It's breathtaking to see all this and see the lengths that Mike and Jose Antonio go to deliver us the best coffee there is. That's it. So it's safe to say that local coffee was built with a bedrock of Cuvee Coffee. I learned about the science that Mike put into his roasting. He told me all about the farmers that he chose, doing his direct relationships, and he explained to me what it meant, but it's one thing to hear an explanation for somebody or read it or research it on the internet, and I after opening my coffee shop, I try to convey that message to my clients. Mike's passion, Mike's stories. He told me about his direct relationships with his coffee farmers and how they were as passionate about what they did as Mike is about his roasting. You know, I had every reason to believe that Mike was telling me the absolute truth, but when he invited me to come to El Salvador, I didn't think twice. It was I couldn't wait to get here and get educated firsthand about how this works. Right off the bat, I met Jose Antonio, and he brought me to his coffee mill. The first night we were here, we've gone through the coffee mill, and I saw what Mike was talking about. I saw his selective sorting. We were going through the mill, watching these girls go through and pick these just perfect, ripe cherries, and that's all he was using. Seeing the different experiments he's doing for Mike for next year's harvest. It's amazing that I met Mike, who shares my passion for life and what he does in coffee, and for Mike to find somebody like Jose Antonio with that same passion about what he does.
So that led us to, you know, getting an invitation from Cuvee Coffee to come out to El Salvador to see where everything starts, how the process begins. And, you know, to be honest with you, the only experience I had with coffee was any research I would do by myself, or really being educated from some of the institution coffee shops throughout the United States. So all that means is that from the roasting to actually consuming, that's the only part of the process that I've been a part of. Which I knew that there's more to it, and I knew that there is a huge part of, you know, before it even got to Mike's hands with Cuvee, but I didn't really know what that meant, and so we decided to come out to El Salvador and see what that would look like. And, you know, it's blown my mind in the fact of all the attention to detail from what, you know, the guys who are out in the who are out in the farms, what they're looking for, you know, and then, you know, actually the level of work it takes to pick a prime product like they are. There's all different variations of quality when it comes down to the coffees, and throughout the elevation of the mountain, you know, how much harder it is to pick the prime cherries, and once, you know, you are picking that, how small the yields are, and you can see why it takes people to specialize in handling the product before it even gets to the mill or to the producer to handle it from there on out.
So for the last 3 years, we've been working with the Santa Rita Natural from San Francisco Estate. And this year we're doing an experiment that we're calling Laguna de las Ranas. And the Laguna de las Ranas, what we're doing is we're trying to focus on the coffees that are a deeper red color, like a Maduro we call it, and using only those cherries or more of those cherries to create the Laguna coffee. So hopefully, what we'll find out is that the flavor, the cup profile, is going to be slightly different than what we get from Cerro. And not that we're unhappy at all with Cerro, we love that coffee, but I think we need to constantly ask ourselves, can this coffee be any better? And that's what we're going to try and find out with the Laguna project. So, I remember my first trip to a coffee growing region, and the things I learned and how I felt about that trip, and it was really cool to be able to watch Matt and Stacy and Robbie experience the same things that I experienced. It was really it was just a great time. I know they learned a lot. I know that this whole process of seeing the coffee, where it starts, the people that are involved in it, how much attention to detail, how much care, how much work goes into creating this coffee, it's just, it was an amazing experience, and I'm really glad that they came with me and that we were able to share that.
Que les vaya bien.